this.
May I address two other points before we,
Please do. Please do.
So the other is, because you are interested in comparing polytheism and monotheism, I want to state that the crucial difference between the two is that in polytheism, there is no individual choice or belief. And, the complexity and the totality of the gods is supposed to ensure the functioning of the cosmos, as does in society, the society as a whole is supposed to make the social order functioning. Yeah. So the polytheistic pantheon is really conceived in the same terms as society.
Wow.
What I want to say is,
what I
want to say with this is we are talking about the Persian period. Again, I was emphasizing it's so important that you look at social political conditions. We are in the Persian period with the great Persian king. Conceptualization of divinity with Elohim representing capitalized God, because there is only one God. Yeah, there's only one great king. I mean, one big lesson which I would also say people should remember is that polytheism is tolerant.
Oh, that's a good one.
Polytheism is, you can, with the moment when I perform a military campaign somewhere and I bring the gods of the defeated enemy into my city, I incorporate these gods into my cult. No problem. I just increase divine presence, which is good. Yeah.
So I take it there's no wars of religion specifically.
There is no war of religion.
Welcome to Scholars Unravel the Middle East. I'm Adel Ali, your host. I was born in the Middle East, but grew up in America, where I practiced patent law and later founded a startup based on my own inventions. And then I went on to my ultimate passion, history, its lessons, shocking surprises, wow moments, and its myths and mysteries. To deep dive into history, I go to the source. I interview scholars, 150 and counting, passionate and preeminent scholars who have spent decades researching primary sources and writing about history. And my goal for this program is to correct our misperceptions and misconceptions about the Middle East, this fascinating region with a strong and remarkable history. My guest is Dr. Beate Pongratz. She's a professor of ancient Near East studies at the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World at New York University, NYU. And she's the author and editor of many books on the political, intellectual, and religious history of the ancient Near East. In this interview, we discuss the following: religions of ancient Middle East before monotheism, different ways of talking about religion, the universalist approach compared to the historical approach, the four constitutive elements of religion, how pantheon of gods reflected human society, the impact of the Persian Empire on polytheism, and what happened to all the gods of polytheism when monotheism became prevalent and dominant, when there was only one god. How do we separate ancient theology from mythology? Does polytheism of ancient Middle East provide any lessons for our modern times? I've also dropped links in the description to other interviews in our program about ancient Mesopotamia, including how climate change destroyed a region and ended a religion, and how royal women of ancient Mesopotamia were manipulated by men for power, how effective diplomacy worked to ensure a long period of peace before the Age of Empires, and my forthcoming interview, which is about the Epic of Gilgamesh. And please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. So stay with me as Dr. Pongratz and I unravel the Middle East. Dr. Pongratz, it's a pleasure to have you on our program. Thank you for taking the time for this conversation with me. Before monotheism, what were the big religions of the ancient Middle East?
So before I even talk about the religions, I would like to emphasize that there are different ways of talking about religion and how to approach the question of religion. So one is the phenomenological approach, which was heavily influenced by the German philosopher and historian of religion, Rudolf Otto, and his idea of the holy. So this Otto worked with the notion of the numinous, so something which is unfathomable, the divine out there, but which we can't even imagine, only experience in a sensory way. So he talks about this kind of universal, he has this kind of universalist approach to religion, which is still, as I see, very pervasive in today's approach about religion. But then there is also a completely different approach. And this is how I was trained at the University of Tübingen in Germany by my teachers at the time in the 80s. And this is, we pursued a historical, anthropological, semiotic approach to religion. This was a time in the 80s when all other departments in Germany still adhere to the phenomenological approach, and we were the only ones to have this kind of historical approach. So this historical approach very much compares to what, for example, here in the United States, Bruce Lincoln, the historian of religion at Chicago University, defines as the 4 constitutive elements of religions, namely community, practice, institution, and discourse. So if I look into these elements, I have to have a historical approach. I can't talk in a universalist way. And what this approach allows for is you as an audience have the possibility to verify every statement I do.
When we talk about, when we approach it from the historical angle.
Exactly. When I talk about the community, about the institution, about discourse, and about practice. Yeah. So, and by this, I mean, so practice, for example, the cult, or later the veneration and prayer, etc., in monotheistic religions, or institution. We can compare in one point of history, there are the temples. In later history, we have the church in Christianity, for example. Yeah. But in both contexts, I talk about institution. When I talk about discourse, it allows me to say, okay, in the very beginning, I have god lists and myths and cultic commentaries, all speculating and talking about the gods. And then in later times, I have doctrines and theological dogmatic statements about belief. But in both cases, it's the discourse within the communities of a particular religion. Yeah?
So if we look at early Christianity with something like, I don't want to call them books, but the writings of St. Augustine, would that fall into discourse?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So everything then, what talks about the gods, either mythology, which is in fact talk about the gods, or god lists, which, organize the pantheon, or, as you say, then later writings or doctrinal writings, they all fall under the rubric discourse. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
the first approach that you were mentioning, that almost sounds like spiritual, abstract, and subjective.
It's very spiritual, and it is an approach. I don't know anything about the piety of an individual in the ancient Near East. I can't say anything about this, but about all the other aspects, how this individual practiced religion, how he talked about the gods, where he went in order to perform religion, who had the authority, namely the temple. Yeah, I can talk about all these aspects. And this is, which makes for you it possible to say, oh, Beate Pongratz makes this historical statement, and I can verify this in any kind of handbook or encyclopedia or something. Yeah.
Most
course,
people wouldn't even.
I am perhaps speculative. I may be speculative because not always I have text or archaeological evidence which allows me to really pinpoint things. But overall, it allows for a very sound comparative approach to religions, because you are interested in what happens very early in contrast to then the monotheistic religions. And I want to talk about the interface between polytheism and monotheism.
Yeah, that makes sense. Dr. Pongratz, Leiston, you appreciate that most people haven't even thought of these two different approaches.
I know.
Yeah. This is
not even my colleagues.
This is very fascinating. So let's adopt your approach for the remainder of our conversation, where we're looking at this.
May I address two other points before we?
Please do.
So the other is, because you are interested in comparing polytheism and monotheism, I want to state that the crucial difference between the two is that in polytheism, there is no individual choice or belief. Again, choice and belief or faith are very crucial components of how people think about the interaction with divinity. But what I will show you is that the interest and the concern in the ancient Near East is a relational social bonding with the divine world, because the individual perceived of himself or herself not as individual person, Beate or Adele, but Beate, daughter of Fernando Pongratz, born in the city of, with the city god, and then a protective genius, a personal god, family god, which was separate from the big local cult, which then turned into state cult. Yeah, so it was a complete different system, and the system was relational. It was a social bonding, a social bonding with the divine world. So it's not about faith, it's not about choice. I can't choose my personal God because I'm already born into a family, into a kin or tribe, into a particular city with a particular patron divinity. So I can't make these choices. Yeah.
I want to make sure I follow what you're saying. When you started talking about choice and belief, you said there is now choice and belief in polytheism.
No.
Oh, you just clarified it. There you go. And no, I was not. I thought you were talking about the 21st century. There is no choice, which makes sense. You're born into, let's say, a hamlet, and this is the god within the pantheon of gods that they worship.
Yes.
And you are part of this.
You are part of the social community and network. Yeah.
Got it. You said 2 points.
Yes. Yeah. So, and the other one is, and what I say is, instead of belief or faith or choice, knowledge is the crucial aspect. Meaning that I have to know the correct name, titles, epithets, any kind of bynames of the divinity when I address the divinity in prayer. Otherwise, I fail in the communication. And I have to know how to perform the ritual properly. Otherwise, again, I fail in communication. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's about knowledge. It's not about, some kind of emotional, relational relation. It is really about knowledge, how to interact. So you can compare it with an audience in court. And prayer in the ancient Near East has been compared by scholarship to audience in the court. You have to follow a particular protocol in order to guarantee that the communication with the divinity works.
That has some similarities to modern monotheism, but in many religions, it's a lot looser, right? You can just kneel by your bed or whatever and pray.
I mean, And this too in the ancient Near East, you have this private or what has been called either private religion or personal piety or household religion. And these are the protective genius and the family god, the personal god. They are together with the ancestors. I will talk about them. They are revered within the household religion. This is completely separate from what is happening in the local cult. The local cult is
I
official.
see.
Yeah. And
Official. I see. Local.
there are professional experts who perform the cult of the patron deity together with the other divinities of the local pantheon, and then the regional pantheon, the supra-regional pantheon, which then, is appropriated for the state cult, for the official state cult. So these household religion and state cult, or the cult, official cult, are two separate spheres.
I see. Does this prepare us to answer my initial question at the outset? Before monotheism, what were the big religions of the ancient Middle East?
Yeah. So what I want to say, I mean, there were not necessarily big religions, but what there was were local cults in every city. I mean, perhaps it's important when we talk about religion, the other very important aspect is always to look into the very concrete social historical context. Yeah. So when I talk about religion of the 4th millennium or 3rd millennium BCE, first half of the 3rd millennium BCE, then I talk about a time when there were competing city-states in Mesopotamia.
Exactly. Yeah.
So large cities with a variety of other cities or hamlets or towns attached to it, but city-states, which were competing with each other for water resources, mostly in the Mesopotamian plain.
Interesting.
So divinity in this context, and also in any other later context, is conceptualized or imagined according to my social experience, which I have, and according to how the individual was perceived. I said in the beginning, the person is not an individual. So personhood is not individual, but it is relational, as I said in the beginning.
Yeah.
So meaning that there is a hierarchy, a vertical axis of social bonding and a horizontal axis. The horizontal axis for the person is the family, kin, and city, etc. And the vertical starts with the ancestors, the divinized ancestors or deified ancestors, and then goes into personal God and city God, etc., up to the supreme God. Yeah. So when I talk about this kind of social self-understanding of the individual, this also characterizes how divinity was conceived. Yeah. If I say that in the ancient Near East there is no duality, no Cartesian duality between body and soul, but the person is conceived as an assemblage of parts. So the body parts, name, the garments, when it comes to status, particular appurtenances or symbols or emblems of power, the name, my seal with which I seal the cuneiform tablet. All these are part of the person and can act as extended body parts of the person in case the person is absent. Yeah, so I can invoke the
This is so complex.
It is very complex, but it explains why divinity in the conceptualization of the ancients is conceived as a mentalizing agent out there an invisible agent which can manifest itself in a statue, astral celestial body, emblem, standard, all kind of,
because it goes back to what you were saying. It's not a duality
it's an
existence.
assembly of parts. Yeah. And the parts are the extended agents of the divinity. So Alfred Gell, the anthropologist, has a very good distinction. He talks about the primary agent, so the divinity as the invisible referent, and then secondary agents. And what I, just mentioned are a statue and emblems and symbols are the secondary agents which mediate divine presence. As in Christianity, the crucifix mediates divine presence, or in Judaism, the Torah mediates divine presence. Yeah, so there is no difference in the function of either icons, relics, whatever I mentioned beforehand, standard symbols, statues, etc. Yeah.
Okay, I want to
mediating.
go back and paraphrase two different things that you said. I just want to make sure I understand it and the audience is following. One is that individuals, you and I, we're not talking about gods in 21st century, have a dual existence, body and soul. But
Yes.
in the ancient Middle East, it wasn't as such. It was a multiform, if you will. I'm using my words, not
Yes.
your words.
Yes. Yeah.
Many different, I don't know, items and concepts could make up who you are.
Yes.
So when we talk about having some sort of idol, a small statue
Yes.
in a cupboard of your house, I'm making this up, obviously, that becomes part of your multi-form existence.
Yes.
That is fascinating. The other thing that you said, and I want to make sure I follow, is that as we're going to talk about religion and gods, whether you are, let's say, in the 17th century CE, 300, 400 years ago, whether you were the king of Spain or a lowly, whatever, doorman in the kingdom, you worship the same God in relatively same form. The king of Spain probably had more opulent sort of churches and what have you. But going back to the ancient Middle East, because now there are ancestors involved and everything else, even the concept of God and your connection to religion is way more complex.
Yes. Yes. And this is why it is a polytheism. I mean, this is exactly what characterizes polytheism. Yeah.
This is so foreign to what we think of as religion.
I don't know, because if you really are serious about what Christianity has to offer as mediators for divine presence, namely the Son of God, the Holy Spirit, God Himself, and Trinity, but then also the saints, Mary, the martyrs, yeah. If you are serious about this, and then you would say there is no monotheism in Christianity.
That is so fascinating.
Actually, the thought of one Godhead, but this is also something which you can find in first millennium BCE, ancient Mesopotamia, and I will talk about this a little later. So one has really what I really want the audience to get out of this conversation is you have to be much more nuanced and much more historical and critical in what you are looking at and how you describe it.
Okay, two follow-up questions. One, I keep on asking you about religion.
Yes.
Does that term even make sense to what we're talking about?
Of course it does.
It does? Okay.
Yes, I mean, religio in Latin originally means bonding or, revering, taking care and respect the sacred. So this is what religio is about. And, this has been then adopted in Western historical research as a term, for religion. So it's absolutely legitimate to talk about religion. But as I said, not necessarily about faith.
Not about faith. I see.
Yeah,
Different than religion. That's a really important concept, faith versus religion. Does the term God make sense in the context of the ancient Middle East?
of course, because there are gods, as I said. Yeah.
But earlier when I was paraphrasing what you shared with me about the class-based concept of religion in the ancient Middle East,
Not
social,
class,
so,
social relational network. That's
relational
different.
network. I thank you for correcting me. If I don't know, there's some sort of veneration towards your ancestor.
Yeah.
Is that ancestor also a god?
It's once you get into the otherworldly realm, things, dead people, of course, assume divine status.
I see.
Yeah, not every ancestor might assume divine status. It's important members of the society or community, which can be, divinized as ancestors. But still, you want to make sure through regular mortuary cult that you take care of your ancestors because they guarantee, from the legal aspect, your inheritance rights, your authority as pater familias, and any kind of status within society, your claim to a particular lot or house. Yeah, so there is this legal aspect which is very, very important to
Wow.
generation of ancestorship, and it shows in the text. Yeah, so in the text we have evidence that they talk about who is my primary heir, because the pater familias always makes sure that during lifetime he knows who is the primary heir to inherit his responsibility and authority to take care of the ancestors, and so continue the inheritance rights of the family. Yeah. So,
You said take care of ancestors. Your ancestors, they're dead. How do you take care of them? By worshiping them? Is
yeah,
that
as
what?
I said, but there are monthly mortuary rituals called hisbon,
Wow.
where you would feed the dead. So you assemble as you assemble as a family. You sit at a table or whatever, and you share food and drink with your ancestors. Because that's very important, and the more children you have, the better. Because in the Gilgamesh epic, they say, how does the person fare with one child? Okay. Because in the netherworld, the dead live of brackish water and dust if there is nobody to take care of them. But if you have many children, then you get food and water, which is important.
When you say share this feast with your ancestors, is there some sort of a relic of them on the table next
Or
to
they
you?
can put some kind of chair or something, there's an
Yeah, yeah.
empty space where they are supposed to be present and take part in the banquet for the dead. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That is
Yeah.
really interesting. So I want to ask this question, but you sort of answered it. I want to ask, how were gods represented in the ancient Middle East? And part of it is, statues and what have you, or even an empty chair, I guess.
I mean, as I said beforehand, divinities are represented in this anthropomorphic statue. And now what I'm going to say, it's very important to distinguish in the context where these icons or objects are used. So the statue, of course, stands in the temple. It's not like in Greek temples that you have statues made of stone necessarily, but made of wood and of a little smaller size, so that you can still carry them around in a festive procession. So when I celebrate the New Year festival in Babylon, where Marduk leaves the temple in festive procession in order to visit his festival house outside the city, he is carried by various people and he is presented sitting on, on a throne or chair and then carried. And this statue, while the procession goes on and the people are standing on the side, they can hold up, little ostraka with a question. And according to how Marduk moves, the statue moves, and how the light changes the color of his face, all is an ominous sign. Yeah, so there are even what is called procession omina. Yeah, when Marduk leaves the temple and looks to the right, it's positive. When he leaves the temple and looks to the left, it's negative. Yeah. So
this is what, and people really, this was important.
This was important because, of course, as I said in the beginning, household religion is separate from the official cult.
Yeah.
And in the official cult, as a normal person, individual in society, you had no access to the temple. Only the people working for the temple economy had access to the courtyards and, the butchery and the bakery, etc., within the temple precinct, not even into the cellar. The cellar was accessible only to the professional priest experts, concerned with the ritual performance, really taking care of the gods. So
this is both elitist and exclusive.
It is exclusive, and but during festivals, this then was the moment where you could relate to the patron divinity of the city, or then travel to Babylon and attend the big Akito festival and relate to the supreme god of the Babylonian pantheon in the first millennium. Yeah.
Wow. Let's take a break here. We'll be back to talk about the rise of monotheism. Dr. Pongratz, during our break, we talked about this wonderful presentation you had given in the past. I'd love for you to share with our audience, and it's already on the screen actually. And I'll open the conversation with this question. What does God mean to you as a historian of ancient Middle Eastern religions?
So when I talk about polytheism, I prefer not to talk only about God, but about divinity or divine status, which can be assigned to ancestors, to statues, to, everything can be divinized in a particular context, as we were already addressing in our former conversation. So the first, as I emphasized so much, the social network, the individual builds for himself or is born into, I would like to show you or share with you proof of this, what I said about the importance of ancestor worship already in Çatalhöyük in 7000 BCE.
Where is that location, Çatal? Oh, you're about to show us. Okay.
Here is in southern Anatolia.
Modern-day Turkey.
Yes, exactly. And you can see that was a settlement of about, at this time, already about 200 houses. So we are now beyond the phase of hunter and gatherer, society.
200,000, that's huge.
200 houses.
200 houses. Oh, okay. 200 houses. Okay.
Of various sizes, showing you that there are different, already stratified, approaches to society. Here you see a reconstruction. And what these houses partially contained were these bucrania, as representing a divinity, these lion panthers or panthers.
So
Which
how big are these items, these artifacts that you're
they
showing?
are, the bucrania are about, I don't know, about what would you say, 50 centimeters or so high. I'm sorry.
So about 4 feet, 40 or something
No,
like that.
not 4 feet. Half.
Half a meter is
Oh,
about.
the bucrania perhaps 2 feet, and then these reliefs also, 2 feet by 4 feet or
Okay.
something.
Okay.
There is this lady of the animals seated between two felines, which must have presented some kind of a divinity. And this is some kind of a reconstruction of a house which must have been dedicated to the veneration of divinities.
Is this a house or a small
It's
temple?
a house or small temple, right?
Yeah.
But also
Oh,
in
wow.
private houses themselves, you could find these bucrania on top of the hearth. Yeah. Here. Yeah. So this is the hearth where they would cook and put their fire. And this is some kind of a reconstruction of this lady who gives birth. So she is represented with two open legs, and so it's a fertility goddess apparently. And then again, these bucrania, which I think might relate to some kind of a weather god type. Yeah.
Hmm.
Later, the weather god in northern Syria and Anatolia has the wild bull as the emblematic animal. And then you have
If can we go back to that picture, please? My question is this. First of all, before I ask my question, could you define the term bukrania? Does that mean that like a statue,
it
an
is. Yeah,
idol?
no, it is. Bukrania is when you show just the head of
Just
a
a
bull.
chip.
Yeah.
Okay, got
Mhm.
it. Okay. And then when you have this steel, if you will, on top of the door, this, or it's not a door, in a
Yeah,
raised platform in your
yeah.
house of a person giving birth. Isn't that a bit unusual? That's a very
Yes,
specific thing.
yes, yes. I
Is
mean, it's a very. We don't have. I don't remember that we have any kind of representation of a fertility goddess that way again. Ishtar in later periods is represented opening her garment in order to expose herself, because not because she was a divinity of motherhood, but of sexuality. Yeah.
sexuality? Wasn't she the goddess of
He
sex?
guaranteed the sexual life in society, between animals, between everything. Yeah, so
Yeah,
that everything reproduced itself, but it's really about sexuality and the allure which comes with sexuality rather than pure notion of fertility. Yeah.
interesting,
So
interesting.
this is what I wanted to emphasize. Then, yeah, so you have this painting that is reconstructed of hunting, where you see this huge bull hunted by human beings. Here is the original.
This seems to be earlier than the settlement with 200 houses that you showed us.
No, this is all from these houses. What
Oh,
I
they're
just showed us
within
was
the house.
all
Okay.
from these houses. Yeah,
So
from the
those
very.
paintings were not from a cave or anything. They were from the
No, no, no,
houses.
no,
Okay.
no, no. I mean, they remind us of cave paintings of
They
Las
do.
and others, right? But
Yes.
what I want to say, it's also, it was present in Çatalhöyük. But then when we come to, and I now want to move on in order to talk about the development of divinity. So what I wanted to say in Çatalhöyük, you also found, and unfortunately I don't have an image of this, but they found skulls lined up along walls of houses, showing you, so severed skulls, so showing you again that the veneration of the ancestors played an important role already in this period. Yeah, what I just told you about the historical period of second millennium inheritance texts. The paterfamilias make sure that he has an heir to take care of the ancestor cult. So that already has its preliminaries in the 7,000, BCE Çatalhöyük. Yeah.
Wow,
So
7,000 BCE. Oof.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that these are concepts of to explain to you the importance of this relational bonding into the divine world through the ancestors. Yeah.
Okay. I follow.
So, and now I want to move towards Uruk in southern Mesopotamia, the famous city of Gilgamesh. Probably some of you have heard about the king Gilgamesh of Uruk and the Gilgamesh epic.
Yeah.
And here you see a reconstruction from third millennium Uruk, and you can see in the end of the fourth millennium, it was already monumental. So you had a terrace with an elevated temple, and around this elevated terrace of the patron divinity Inanna of Uruk were grouped several temples, which are, located here, as well as then adjacent houses. Yeah, the entire city at the beginning of the third millennium was enclosed by a city wall, the famous city wall, which is described in the Gilgamesh epic. He mounts on the city wall and, gives you the view of the city of Uruk. And here, that was what I took as a photo when I was in Uruk. I worked in Uruk in 1984 during the Iran-Iraq war. We did a survey in Uruk. And here you see what has been the city wall. Yeah, and you can see how immense the area was, the city wall enclosed already.
How do you know that's not just a natural earthen
because,
mound?
it has been dug. And when you dug down, you see the shapes of the bricks. This is only the erosion caused by wind and rain. Yeah,
I see.
But below you find the bricks. So what you see, it's all, in Mesopotamia, it's very different from Egypt because they built with brick and not with stone. So what you see, here's the temple mount of the heaven god Anu, the other important city god of Uruk. And all this, hides buildings. So here is a view down from the temple terrace onto the various temples which had been excavated and then now again are eroded because excavation took place already in the 40s, 50s. And then, at this time, there did not any kind of preservation.
So based on what you're showing me, Dr. Pongratz, a layperson like me, I'm not a historian, I'm not an archaeologist, ends up walking around somewhere in parts of Syria or Iraq, remote regions, on a hill or some sort of mole. For all you know, you're actually walking on ancient buildings or ancient sites.
I mean, if you come to the southern Mesopotamian plain, so everything south of Baghdad, Baghdad, or later in earlier times, Babylon was very close to Baghdad. So everything south of this is a complete plain, flat plain. Yeah. And so you can assume that every what we call tell, a ruin mount, coming out of the plain hides something.
Wow, what a treasure trove of
and
history here.
Now that, and this is during Iran-Iraq, during the American invasion, of course, or after, many of these mounds have been looted because people knew and they brought things to the antiquity market to make a living, and so
that's unfortunate. That's very unfortunate.
very bad
Do you have
consequence.
more slides to share with us?
Yeah, just some, this is just a ground plan of the temples to show you the monumentality, and that temples were really distinguished from the rest of buildings by their indented walls outside, so that you could see niched walls, which would show you the temple. Then I want you to show this is a meter high, so 3 feet high, a head of the ruler of 4th millennium Uruk, who, and now I want to show you what he takes care of. He takes care of the cult. So he is in front of a goddess or a priestess. And here you see the wild bull of Inanna. And on the bull, you see 2 figures standing, which might be the astral, the version of Venus, the rising and setting Venus. So then we see ceilings showing the ruler with captives, controlling life and death of captives. You see him representing fertility because he takes care of the temple. These emblems, so this is important, these emblems are reed bundles of Inanna. And just by putting them frontal to opposite each other, they represent the entrance to the temple. And what do they show in the temple? Not the divinity or the statue, but the jars. So they show that in the 4th millennium Uruk, the temple was perceived as an economic household of which the divinity was the owner. And the community gathered around this temple in order to guarantee the functioning of the cult economically. Yeah,
that's interesting. Jars,
so
like jars.
what I want to say is, it's not about choice. Temples emerge at crucial points, either way stations, trading stations, crossing points of rivers, etc. And then communities built their temples. But in southern Mesopotamia, the temple were big economic households, not necessarily primarily conceived as a house of veneration. Yeah, that was part of it.
Yeah.
Cult, but it functioned as an economic household. So here the
Also,
root.
maybe an administrative center as well.
Yeah, of course. It was
Yeah.
a center of, bringing in all the commodities, redistributing, again, things to the people working for the temple. So it was a huge bureaucratic institution. Yeah. Here you see the ruler traveling with the pedestal. Again, you see the reed bundles of Inanna. You don't need the presence of a divine statue. You know that she is there because there are the reed bundles and her emblematic animal. Yeah.
Interesting.
And now I come to the most, my favorite piece, because it shows you that in 4th millennium BCE, divinity was conceived in many ways. So what you see is, on the one hand, the reed bundle, which is the symbol of Inanna, and which in cuneiform writing then turned into the sign Mush3 for Inanna, which was used for Inanna, to write Inanna. At the same time, it shows you the sun rising between 2 mountains. So that's already very abstract. And you see the rising sun and you see the setting sun. But because it's combined with a star as the astral celestial body of Inanna, it shows you it was conceived as the rising and setting Venus. And then you get the bull, and here you get the drum, which in archaic writing then represents festival. So what this seal tells you is this is the festival of the rising and setting Venus. in addition to this seal of the fourth millennium, we have contemporary texts which talk about administrative text, which lists offerings to Venus as the rising Venus, Venus as the setting, Venus as the morning star, as the evening star, and Inanna Prince, so the princely Inanna.
Tell me what Inanna is. You've used that term.
Inanna is the female goddess, the patron divinity, tutelary divinity of Uruk, who later got assimilated with Ishtar. Yeah, so Inanna, Ishtar are the same figures.
Okay.
Inanna is the Sumerian, the very early version of later Akkadian Ishtar. Yeah?
Got it.
Okay, so what I want to say is, because we also have this famous, beautiful head of the lady, so-called Lady of Uruk, which must represent Inanna in the anthropomorphic shape. Yeah? Because this head in reality is not round, but flat on the back and was attached to a wall, meaning you wouldn't show any kind of human figure attached to a wall, right? Attached to a wall, you, as a relief or half a relief, half a mounted relief or sculpture, you do only with a divinity. And we know this from other evidence in later Ashur, etc., in the north. So what I want to say is, in fourth millennium Uruk, we see that the divinity was conceived in anthropomorphic terms as owner of the temple, in anthropomorphic shape, in astral terms as a celestial body, as a symbol with the reed bundle. Yeah, so we have all these various forms how divinity could be represented or mediated. Yeah, so how Inanna, as the invisible divinity out there, could manifest itself in these various modes of presence. Yeah.
Wow.
So what I want to say is, it doesn't make sense at all to think in the terms, in the universalist terms of, oh, in the beginning, there's only this numinous, animated universe. No. Of course, rivers, mountains, springs could be deified and could have a divinity. And the heaven god could control heaven, but also was conceived as an anthropomorphic mentalizing agent. Yeah, the weather god controlled thunder and rain, so thunder was his voice. At the same time, he could act as a mentalizing agent. Yeah. So what I want to say is, it's so important that we don't take an evolutionary approach to religion, but because 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 10,000 years in the cognitive development of humankind are nothing. And people in Çatalhöyük, as well as in Uruk, or later than first millennium BCE, conceived and perceived of divinity the same way as we do today.
Okay, let's not take an evolutionary approach to religion. I understand what you mean by that. But at some point, polytheism, and we're talking about the Middle East, fades.
Yes.
And maybe I shouldn't use the word fade. Maybe it was more explosive. Maybe it happened quickly. And you can tell me about that. But this is a question I hadn't sort of queued myself up to ask you, but now I'm asking it because I'm just wondering, this is such a complex and ingrained and organized system within societies and the social fabric of societies.
Yes.
And it's not just one God. The concept of multiform divinities are so well entrenched.
Yes.
How does it go from having all these to one day saying, I'm going to only worship one God.
Yeah.
That's
So
almost revolutionary, right?
yes, yeah. Now it's not revolutionary, and this is because it happens already during the first millennium BCE. So with the I was talking about these various stages, the relational stages, but then the polytheistic system is thought and organized to take care of the cosmic order. What do I mean by this? Every god in the polytheistic pantheon has a particular set of functions and roles. And, the complexity and the totality of the gods is supposed to ensure the functioning of the cosmos, as does in society, the society as a whole is supposed to make the social order functioning. Yeah. So the polytheistic pantheon is really conceived in the same terms as society.
Reflects that society takes care of the earthly matters, and
So it's what I tried like to talk about when I talk about polytheistic systems. I talk of them as conceptually conceived as sociomorphic. So as
sociomorphic.
the same way society works. Why do I emphasize this? Because during the first millennium with the empires, Assyrian Empire, Babylonian Empire, we see more and more the tendency to concentrate functions and roles on one divinity in one particular context. And it very often happens in prayer, especially, that I concentrate all capabilities, all divine capabilities out there on one divinity in order to ensure that in this particular moment, the divinity has the full scope of agency to take care of my concerns, free me of my afflictions or social marginalization or whatever. And so I concentrate all, the various functions and roles on one divinity. And this is why I can get lists where say, Ninurta is the Pleiades, Ninurta is Adat, Ninurta is another, different divinities, in order to really concentrate agency on one divinity. What I also see in Mesopotamia, you have not names like Adel and Beate, you have sentence names. And an interesting name in
for people or for gods?
For people, no, for people.
Okay.
Also in the beginning for gods, but for people especially, I'm now talking about. And what you see, for example, is a name which is Ashur, so the supreme god of the Assyrian pantheon, is the totality of the gods. Ashur Gabu Ilani. Yeah. So all the divinities are subsumed under Ashur. So, these tendencies in the first millennium have been subsumed under the term of henotheism. So, bringing everything into one deity. And you can see this then in ancient, so the same Ashur Gabu Ilanu, so Ilani, Ashur is the totality of the gods. You see then in ancient Israelite religion, you see that they use the term El. So El is for the god El, but then the plural Elohim can be used for the gods, the God, and capitalized God as a proper noun for God. Yeah. So in the 5th century BCE, in the priestly code, in the book of Leviticus, which is, very much concerned with the cultic provisions and cultic regulations, you find the term Elohim not for a multiplicity of gods, but for God, capitalized.
Wow.
What I
To
want to
follow.
say is,
Go
what
ahead.
I want to say with this is, we are talking about the Persian period. Again, I was emphasizing it's so important that you look at social political conditions. We are in the Persian period with the great Persian king, who in Herodotus is called Basileus.
Which means?
Basileus, just king,
Okay.
great king, Basileus, without the king, yeah? So only
Hmm.
Basileus, great king. There was supposedly only one great king, even though he had vassal kings in the various parts and provinces of his empire, but they were subordinate. So there was only one great king. And, you know, this kind of social, political reality is translated into a theological conceptualization of divinity with Elohim representing capitalized God, because there is only one God. Yeah.
Oh, this is really
Parallel
interesting.
to, there's only one great king. Yeah.
Just several minutes ago in this segment, you were telling us how, or well, this is how I paraphrased it, how uh, gods and the divinity reflected the complexity of the earthly society. You and I living
Yes.
6,000 years ago.
Right. Yes.
As society becomes more organized and becomes bigger, city states become kingdoms and they become empires, gods begin to reflect that reality on earth. One
Yes.
emperor, one Shahanshah, whatever they were
Yeah. Yeah.
called.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. So what happens to all the lesser divinities? Do
So
they just
the interesting thing is that, and this is very important. I said that the temples were huge institutions,
Mhm.
and part of not only economic institutions, but of course you had an entire scholarly intelligentsia attached either to the temple or even detached from the temple, which um, or that produced all the lore, all the texts, you know, all the mythology, all the astral, astrological compendia, all, you know, the medical treatises, everything which we find as, you know, the broad textual production of literary texts was produced by these people. They were working for the ruling elites. The moment the ruling elites get deposed because there is now an outside king, either the Hellenistic king or a first Persian king, then Hellenistic king, these kings had no interest in participating in the local cult of the cities, yeah, the big cities of Babylon, Ashur, Uruk, as there is
they don't
still,
suppress them, but they don't
they don't
participate.
suppress them.
Yeah.
They only made sure that they could function so that they could tax them. They taxed the temple households immensely. Yeah. So they
Okay.
suffocated these temples economically,
They suffocated. Okay.
nearly. Yeah.
Nearly. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
so what I want to say is, with this development, the intelligentsia retreated completely into the temples. And as the temples become the institutions where the production of scholarly lore continued. They continued to produce rituals, state rituals, like the New Year festival, with the king as protagonist, although the king never came and participated. They also produced texts which were critical of kingship and where the scholar would guide the king in ethical behavior and, you know,
Yeah.
correct behavior towards the temple, so that he would, you know, take care of the temple cult financially.
Yeah.
So this is a very important development, because it shows the restriction of cuneiform writing into the temples and more cuneiform knowledge gets restricted until it disappears in the 1st century CE. With this disappearance of and the fact that the cult was not officially used as a political tool by the ruling elites, the gods lose their legitimacy, their existence. Yeah. And partially they became assimilated. So Apollo became assimilated with the god, scribal god Nabu, or Artemis and Athena got assimilated with Nanaya, the consort of Nabu. Partially also then, for example, in the Parthian period, in the Arsacid period, they revived the Ashur cult, but then you can also see at the same time the syncretism between Nergal, who was originally an underworld god and god of pestilence. You see him assimilated to Heracles. So you get all these kinds of syncretism happening between gods, indigenous gods of Babylonia, and then gods coming in with new groups of people. One must also be aware of the social political fact that with these huge empires of the Persians, Greeks, and Roman Empire, there happened huge migrations. You had already deportations of thousands of people during, Neo-Assyrian campaigns, Neo-Babylonian campaigns, military campaigns. But, this kind of movement of people really increased with the huge empires of the Persians and Greeks and Romans, meaning that mercenaries and merchants, the moment they were financially well off, they would come, and wherever they settled, they would build sanctuaries of their own divinities. And so you get, all of a sudden, you get now this pluralistic polytheism, of all kinds of different gods, of different communities, of different origins. And it is in this conglomeration or marketplace of religions.
I like that, marketplace of religions.
Okay. That then you see all of a sudden, because I think, these are also times with all this migration of people and uprooting of people, there might have been a little bit more of an insecurity of the individual, but what you see all now growing is mystery cults. And then you see the prophets coming, really depriving the institution of the temple of their authority and claiming to be the voice of God. You see Jesus as the founder and teacher of a religion. Later, and this grows out of Judaism. You see Muhammad coming up as a prophet of religion. So you see these founders, historical founders of religion with their own history, with their own story, depriving temple institution of their authority and claiming now authority and being the sole mediator between God,
the one God,
and people. So it's a very interesting developments, but at the same time, for example, in ancient Israel, you see an emergent elite of rabbis or other scholastic people who say, yes, there is the prophet who claims to have the word of the God, and I read to you the word of the tablet of Moses, but I interpret it for you as well. Yeah, so there comes the entire commentary vision, which now puts itself up between the people and God.
Yeah. It seems like, in a way,
now you have this emergence of a new authority.
A new sort of temple, if you will.
Exactly. Yes.
In the minute that we have left of this segment, and I do want to get to our subsequent segments that are just very interesting as well. I just want to understand, after everything you just explained, Dr. Pongratz, why do you say we're not going to look at polytheism to monotheism, not in an evolutionary approach? You
Yeah,
just went through the evolution of how this happened.
yeah. Okay. No,
Yeah.
no. No. What I want to say, that of course is an evolution that we.
Yeah.
It's not in a. I don't value this. Yeah. I don't say monotheism. As I said, there is no real monotheism because you have all these other mediators in Christianity and Judaism.
Interesting. Yeah.
But now, what I wanted to say, there is no evolutionary or should not be an evolutionary take on the development of how I think about divinity.
Oh,
Not
I see.
divinity, that I say there are, everything can have divine status, but there is always an invisible agent out there whom then I present in a statue, in a symbol, something, in an anthropomorphic shape. This is what I want to say, that the anthropomorphizing, mentalizing conception of God is out there from the beginning.
Yeah, there's no evolutionary aspect to that, but there is an evolutionary approach to organized societal social religion that evolves.
Yeah, I mean, this, I would say that society, the moment even hunters-gatherers are organized in a way, and the moment you have settlement in the, in Çatalhöyük, or even earlier than also with Göbekli Tepe, 10,000 BCE, where you see these T-shaped pillars. I don't know whether you know of them, but they come in big circles, showing that there is some kind of veneration of either tribal gods or tribal spirits or something, or ancestors. We don't know exactly. But what I want to say is community is always organized. It becomes more stratified and more divided in labor. So it's much more, distinguished in the various tasks of labor once you are in the city-state of the 4th millennium BCE or 3rd millennium BCE. Yeah, but it's extremely organized, very hierarchical. You can see this in the profession list. So it's then, it's only the difference is only territorial control, that it really grows from city-state into territorial state into empire state.
This is fascinating.
The organization of the polytheistic pantheon is the same.
Yeah. And the concept of divinity has been there from the very beginning. Got it.
Yes.
In the next segment of our conversation, we'll talk about theology versus mythology and also Dr. Pongratz's career. Dr. Pongratz, how do we separate ancient theology from mythology?
So you remember that in the very, very beginning, I said there are 4 constituents of religion, and one of them is discourse. And what I want to say is there is...
Yeah, if I may repeat the 4 constituents: community, practice, institutions, and the 4th one is discourse, which you're going to talk about now.
And we are now talking about discourse.
Okay.
Yeah? So again, I want to debunk the evolutionary approach by thinking that mythology is an archaic state of the mind. It's not. Mythology is an analytical tool which provides patterns of orientation, patterns of explanation, of, it's some kind of a metaphor telling you how to think about the relationship between gods and humankind, how to perceive of the cosmos, the development of creation, how to think about death, life, birth, all kinds of love. So all kinds of, important aspects of life are negotiated in mythology, in ancient mythology. And I want to give you some examples what mythology can do. So, for example, it can be a sociogony, yeah? So it tells you about the structure of society. In the ancient Near East, and I experienced this still when I was working in Iraq in the 80s, there are no marginalized people. Everybody has his or her place in society. And even, the crippled ones have their place. So there is one myth where the god Enki and the goddess Ninmah get together in the banquet and get drunk, and then they challenge themselves in creating all kind of incapacitated people, and then the other is supposed to give this poor cripple a place in society. So, for example, one creates a blind man who is then allotted the musical arts. Yeah, so you remember in Egypt or in Mesopotamia, you have the blind musician, the blind person who plays the harp. Then people with broken or paralyzed feet are assigned the task of the silversmith. The idiot is put into the service of the king, yeah, to entertain the king. The infertile woman is appointed as a weaver in the household of the queen, and the eunuch is granted a position close to the king. And the last individual, where scholarship is not sure what it is, either a baby or a miscarriage or, a prematurely born baby, this is the last, person to be created, which has still to grow and then take care of duties in the temple. So all this takes place during a banquet, and it is assumed that this perhaps was performed in the temple during a banquet where, it was supposed that the gods took part in. But, this sociogony shows you that they thought about how to structure society, how to provide a place for everybody in society. Then there is some kind of a mixture between anthropogony and sociogony, namely a myth which tells about the creation of the king. So perhaps the flood story where humankind is created to take over the toil of the gods in working in agriculture and irrigation to take care of the cult of the major gods. Mm-hmm. So this part is part of this sociogony, which tells about the creation of the king. But at the end, the king is created as the Maliku person, as the one who has the counsel, who can advise, and who gets then all the royal insignia, the crown and the scepter, and the divine aura of the gods and advisors. So
it seems like all these stories, these religious stories, I'll call them that, or reflect society.
This is what I say. Yeah, the myth is an explanatory model for what happens in society. Yeah, you have other myths which talk about alterity. Yeah, they talk about one big question and or one big problem could be also the cohabitation of pastoralists and city dwellers. And pastoralists in the ancient Near East were always perceived as minor members of the society because they lived in tents. At the moment you live in tents, you don't know how to perform properly a burial. You don't know how to bake bread. You don't know, how to a cemetery or something. So there are all these negative cliches about pastoralists in the urban point of view of elitist urban life, or people in the cities. So this, and the entire mythology, as I said, is providing explanation, orientation, how to behave or perform life properly in society. Then in addition, in this discourse, in this ancient discourse about the gods, you have god lists which organize the pantheon. Yeah, so you have long god lists already in the beginning of the third millennium BCE. You have god lists which lists all the gods in either a genealogy, that is in familial ties, in a hierarchy, or in after the model of the courtly royal retinue. Yeah, so again in a organized hierarchical order.
So which part of this is myth? Which part of it is religion?
This is not myth, because the god lists are just lists. They come with only Sumerian names, and then later they come with Sumerian and Babylonian names. And in Ugarit, in Levantine Ugarit on the Mediterranean coast, you find god lists, Sumerian, Babylonian, Hurrian from Anatolia, Hittite, and Ugaritic. I mean, you find them all together, seeing that there was always the attempt to organize gods according to their function and roles. Because when it came to international treaty making, you wanted to make sure that the gods of the one party equaled the gods of the other party. You wanted to make sure that their functions and roles could compete with each other. Yeah.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah, so this is what we call the translatability or the translation of gods. Yeah. And then, again, with this kind of translation mechanism in the international political treaty scene, this is then adopted again in the theological discourse when it comes to accumulating all the capacities, roles, functions onto one divinity. Yeah, so you see there are all these various mechanisms which allow for theological new formations, and which then develop towards one monotheistic God. Yeah,
I understand.
this is what I call the interface between polytheism and monotheism. They are not completely separated. Yeah, polytheism really prepares monotheism, and this is why I say monotheism is not revolutionary.
Yeah, I gleaned that from the last segment. It really is not. I thought there's a break between polytheism and monotheism, but the way you said that was really not like that at all. Do religions of ancient Middle East provide any lessons for modern Middle East, you think?
I mean, one big lesson which I would also say people should remember is that polytheism is tolerant.
Oh, that's a good one.
Polytheism is, you can, with the moment when I perform a military campaign somewhere and I bring the gods of the defeated enemy into my city, I incorporate these gods into my cult. No problem. I just increase divine presence, which is good. Yeah.
So I take it there's no wars of religion specifically.
There is no war of religion. And even, I mean, some people have mixed up the so-called loyalty oath of Esarhaddon, of one Assyrian king, where it comes to swearing loyalty to the overlord, the Assyrian overlord, and to Ashur, the supreme god of the Assyrians. They took it as if the defeated people were obliged to convert, but that's not the case. The Assyrian king had no interest whether the people venerated their own gods or not. Loyalty was what counted. Loyalty to the king, loyalty to the god Ashur. But what you did at home didn't count at all. Yeah. So what I want to say is polytheistic religion has the big advantage of being tolerant.
Maybe we could use some of that here in America, huh?
Yes.
So, Dr. Pongratz, you're quite passionate about this field. How did you get into this?
So when I was 12 years old,
12 years old.
my mother took me and my younger brother into an art gallery where she loved to go because of the owner. She loved to talk to the owner.
This is in Germany?
This is in Cologne in Germany
Yeah.
in 60s. And at this time, this gallery had a large collection of art postcards. And I went for Egypt, and my brother went for Greece. So I came back with, several postcards from Egypt, and from then on, I wanted to read everything about Egypt. My father had to take me into every exhibition in Germany which was concerned with Egypt. I traveled to Berlin at some point to see Nefertiti in Berlin and, was absolutely smitten with Nefertiti. And,
Wow.
but it never occurred to me that I could study Egyptology. So instead, I trained as a translator and interpreter and thought I would go in diplomacy and went to Tübingen to do political studies and discovered, oh my God, there is Egyptology taught in Tübingen. And I went to the professor who told me, you don't have to come back if you don't speak all European languages. I said, I speak English, Spanish, French. And then he said, oh, then you can also read Italian, no problem. So, okay. So I started studying Egyptology. And then in the same house were Ancient Eastern Studies. And they went to Uruk to do a survey several years. And I said, I want to join you. And I joined the campaign to Uruk. And
So you went to Iraq?
Yes, I went to Iraq in 84. And, this is how I got hooked. And at first, I wanted to be an archaeologist, but then I discovered my interest in history of religion, and which needs, of course, the knowledge of the text. And so
Yeah.
I turned then already after my MA thesis, I turned towards writing with, working with text. I also excavated in Syria on the Khabur River, close to Deir ez-Zor, close to today Deir ez-Zor. But still, my interest then lay with history of religion and history of religion really as history of culture, because in the ancient East, religion pervades culture. Yeah.
Yeah. What ancient Middle Eastern languages can you read?
So you have to be versant in Sumerian and in Akkadian. Yeah. So
And
cuneiform.
both cuneiform, yeah. Do these two languages are distinct and separate from Aramaic?
No, I mean, Sumerian is completely distinct. People up to today don't know which family it belongs to. There is because it's an agglutinated language. It's working completely different from Semitic languages. And people are still not clear whether it's originated in the Caucasus or something, and people then migrated down into the Mediterranean plain. One doesn't really know. And now I lost my thread.
And we were talking about, I was asking you whether or not
Aramaic and Hebrew. These are all Semitic languages, and they are cognates of what, the Akkadian language is the first East Semitic language, and then you have West Semitic language and Aramaic, all Ugaritic, and, all the others. Hebrew are West Semitic.
If you wanted our audience to remember just one point about religions of ancient Middle East, what would it be?
I mean, this is what I just said, tolerance.
Tolerance, yeah. It goes back to exactly what you said earlier.
What I said earlier, yeah. And I think, it's really, really important to understand for people nowadays is here in America, the Americans have some kind of a continuous development or history of their constitution, except and statehood, except for the Civil War. But it's important to understand that the people in the Middle East, they hark back really thousands of years for their identity shaping. And I emphasize this because with the recent developments of first colonialism and then later now all these factions, various different religious factions, political leadership tended to go back thousands of years because it was easier to provide cohesion with harking back to the times of Hammurabi. Yeah, Saddam Hussein represented himself as Hammurabi with the law stele, providing law and order for the people.
Or the Shah of Iran went back to the time of the Persians. Yeah.
With the Cyrus cylinder, which was perceived as the first charter of humanity rights, human rights, right, by the UNESCO, but also at the time of the Shah. So that's, Thank
you for sharing that. Dr. Pongratz, thank you for educating me and our listeners. And to our listeners, if you know of any history that could unravel the Middle East, please share it with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity for sharing my ideas.